Women in 1980. Women in 2026. It's Saturday. I'm Akorn. This is Gen X and Millennial Memes. Let's jump straight into today's show, starting with this week's pop quiz. When the Breakfast Club ends, what song plays as Judge Nelson raises his fist on the football field? If you think you know, drop it down in the comments below, and stay tuned, because we'll give the answer later on in the show. 1980s piracy. I finally got that song on the radio recorded perfectly. That was always an achievement. Only someone who lived through the 80s would understand this frustration. This was one of my pet peeves. I hated it when I seen one of these chords that was twisted up. And there was some people that simply didn't care, especially when they had the really long chords. I hated it so much, I'd actually spend the time to unravel somebody's phone cord. On the other hand, it really wasn't worth it. You should have just threw it in the trash and put a new one on, because back then, you always had a spare phone cord in a drawer somewhere. But first, let me take a selfie. That is actually what it looks like. Who remembers these chairs? Yeah, I certainly do. We never had any that was on the right side. My dad hated those type, but we always had the ones that's on the left there. Pretty certain that we even had that color at one time, but later on it was just different shades of green. I remember my dad would actually buy the rolls of the replacement material and would just redo the whole chair. It'd basically be like brand new again. When I was a kid, this was my curfew. Your little Chuck Norris memes are cute, but this guy made it from New York City to Chicago on a holiday weekend with no money, babysat Kevin McAllister and Iceman's wife, saved the galaxy from Rick Moranis, and brought bobsledding to Jamaica. Yeah, John Candy had some great movies. And from what I've heard and read about, he was also a pretty kind and generous guy. I can't remember what movie it was, but I do remember reading one time that he refused to continue shooting a scene until all of the staff, janitors, and all the other people had a place to warm up, hot food to eat, and was able to take a break. And I think he even paid for all that. You wake up in your childhood bedroom at 10 years old with all of your current knowledge. What's your first move? Do the only thing that actually matters. This actually sounds like a pretty good plot line for a story. What do you guys think? Would you guys listen to a story that was based around this? Let me know in the comments. When your elf wants to make new friends. Well, that would be one way. After swimming, this used to hit so hard back in the day. Yeah, but they're doing it wrong. The chips goes on the sandwich, not just next to it. One of the funniest 80s films ever made. I'd have to agree. Dick Van Dyke says he still wants to play Scrooge at 99. I've still got time. As far as that movie goes, he'd probably be perfect for that role. Kids, this is what the phrase, "the good old days" means. That is true. How many of you guys know that nicotine is actually a neuroprotectant? Now you know the real reason behind all the stop smoking campaigns. I guess people just thought the government really loved them that much. Thriller by Michael Jackson, released 43 years ago. John Candy's son, Chris Candy, recreated Del Griff's iconic look this Thanksgiving to honor his father and a 38-year legacy of planes, trains, and automobiles. Well, you can certainly tell he's John Candy's son. PG in the 80s. PG today. On some things, yeah, especially common sense. But it's also at the completely other end of the spectrum on other things. Usually things that I talk about on Sunday shows. Daniel Stern filmed Marv's spider on the face moment in Home Alone in a single take, silently screaming so he wouldn't startle the real tarantula crawling across his cheeks. Yeah, I was reading more about this, and he actually had to do that scream without making a single sound, and then they added it back later in post-production. The phones of our childhood. I actually do remember having a football phone at one point, but it was made different than that one. Where the stitches are, it had an actual receiver that you could pick up. Of course, it was the transparent phones that became the most popular. Every 80s kid has a photo with this exact letterboard. That is very true. They always use those. And the funniest part is when the teachers misspelled something, especially if they never noticed until the photos came out. Rickroll status, legend. That is a pretty good one. Today is the day you learn Mr. Feeney was the voice of Kit from Knight Rider. That is something I never realized. How many of you guys knew about this? Don't forget to wear your Cabbage Patch earmuffs. It's cold out there. Yeah, it certainly is. Glad to have a wood stove. Who remembers the smell of this? Who remembers how many kids ate that? How many of you guys ate glue paste? Or if you dared a friend and actually got them to eat it? Remember when it was actually worth getting up early on Saturday mornings? Yeah, couldn't sleep in too late. You'd miss most of them.
So one of the biggest questions that longtime fans of the Muppets had is, what exactly is Gonzo? Is he a bird? Is he something else? He's kind of like a turkey, but not really. Well, in 1999's Muppets from Space, we actually find out that Gonzo comes from a family of aliens. And in that movie, he finds his alien family by climbing up on his roof and getting struck by lightning, which is exactly the scene that brought us this guy here today. Now, the Muppet designers purposely singed Gonzo's trademark beak and his blue fur to show that he'd been struck by lightning in the movie. And the most unique feature of this Muppet is that his eyes light up. There's a battery pack in the back and LED lights have been replaced in those eyes so that his eyes glow from the lightning strike that was seen in the movie. So if you're a fan of the Muppets and you want to bid on Gonzo, go to propstore.com today and sorry, had a frog in my throat.
I distinctly remember moms picking up kids from school in a dustbuster. I don't know if it was the same model, but I do remember vans that had that really steep end nose. I guess they figured it made it more aerodynamic. It looks like those Duke boys are in another tight spot. You can't let those impulsive decisions win. The real ones know. Today's pop quiz question was, when the Breakfast Club ends, what song plays as Judge Nelson raises his fist on the football field? The answer is, Don't You Forget Me by Simple Minds. It amazes me that a phone cord back in the day could stretch from one room to another, but you can't get a USB cord to last a week. Ain't that the truth? Shout out to everyone that still remembers their childhood phone number, but can't remember a password you created yesterday. You are my people. Be honest, guys, how many of you actually have your passwords saved to a text file on your computer so you can just copy and paste them? And even then, at some point, the website will still claim that the password is incorrect, and you have to reset it yet again. The mayor in Jaws is still the mayor in Jaws 2. That's why it's important to vote in your local elections. I don't even know if those are real these days. Well, looks like he's returning back to his origins. You're 12, it's snowing and school is canceled. Choose your ride. Do any of you remember any kind of sled back in the day that come remotely to looking like number 2? Because I sure as heck don't. Josh Brolin attended an 80s themed costume party as himself in The Goonies. Somewhere between Apocalypse Now and The Matrix, let's remember that Lawrence Fishburne was Cowboy Curtis on Pee-wee's Playhouse in the 80s. Let's be honest, watching childhood cartoons when you're an adult is really weird. Yeah, sometimes. Who else learned how to tell time on these clocks? Apparently they need to bring these back. Remember me? Yes, I do. It was back in a time when the size that was printed on the shoe was actually the same size no matter which pair of shoes you picked up. Tonight, you will be visited by 3 ghosts.
I ain't afraid of no ghosts.
Your McDonald's childhood. MacGyver. So awesome that even his name is a verb. That is true. If you couldn't make something, you'd just MacGyver it. Nostalgia is on a 20-year cycle. Then explain why the 90s were nostalgic for the 80s, the 2000s for the 80s, the 2010s for the 80s, and the 2020s for the 80s. This does seem to be true. I actually saw something a couple weeks ago about how a lot of Gen Z kids are now going back and listening to a lot of the music and movies from the 70s and 80s, which is actually pretty interesting to me, especially with how a lot of the younger generations today were raised to be such snowflakes. And I'll end today's show with this. Everyone you meet is fighting a battle you know nothing about. Be kind, always. That's it for today's show, but I'll see you guys back here on Sunday's show. Until then, I thank you all for watching. You guys take care and stay safe this weekend. This is Akorn, over and out.
Safety first. That's my motto. When one is doing dangerous work, one must pay careful attention to the safety of one's body. Know what I mean? But one day, I'll be a camp counselor, and I'll be running this place. I'll be shaping and molding youthful minds into a focused worldview. Yep. Ernest P. Worrell, camp counselor, an extraordinary thing to witness.